Welcome to this special edition of Focus on Dearborn. This is a special one-hour edition. In it, we are going to speak with the three candidates for State Representative, 15th District. This is for the state of Michigan. And the candidate with us in the studio first is Paul Kane. Paul is a Libertarian. And I'm going to ask you to start by telling us a little something about yourself. I decided I would let the candidate speak for himself rather than my presenting his biographical information. So Paul, tell us a little something about yourself and why you believe you're qualified to be our state representative.
Hi, Jackie. Thanks for inviting me. I'm 41. I'm single. I grew up in Oakland County, graduated from Waterford Mott in 1972. The only election anything I ever ran for was in high school for the Student Congress, and I won that, so perhaps that's a good omen. Why am I a good candidate? I've been studying what's going on in our government, our country, our state, our city for a good 10 years, watching real closely. And what I'm finding is a lot of people are concerned about what the government's doing, about the fact that they keep making more laws and spending more of our money. And I want to try to sway our government back to the way we were supposed to be, which was freedom, and I think I can do it.
Okay, now this is basic libertarian philosophy, but why don't you go through, if you would, go through a primer of libertarian philosophy for us?
In a nutshell, what libertarians usually describe themselves as is socially liberal and economically conservative. Socially liberal in that we don't think that the government should be telling you how you should live your life. People should be free to live the way they want to as long as they're not hurting someone else. And economically conservative because we think that the government shouldn't be the one deciding how we will spend our money. It's our money. We can best decide ourselves how to spend it. Mm-hmm. So you're not really Republican or conservative, and you're not really liberal either.
Now, with the money issue, are you saying, do you object to taxation and income tax?
Income tax specifically, I'm very dissatisfied with. I grew up learning that when you take something that belongs to something else, it's not good. It's called stealing. It's bad to do. My money, which the government takes in taxes, is really nothing but stealing, but it's government sanctioned, so somehow it's supposed to be okay if the government does it. There are needs for taxes because there are some jobs that government should do and can perhaps is the most logical group of people to do, and so some taxing is necessary, but certainly not the way we spend money nowadays.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I was asking the candidates before they came on if they would send me questions that they thought were appropriate to ask them that would help them get some of their ideas across. And one of the questions that Paul sent was this: the very first thing you would do upon taking office includes taking an oath to the U.S. Constitution. In your words, how relevant is the U.S. Constitution these days?
I put that question down because I'm very interested in hearing what the other candidates say about that. The U.S. Constitution is very critical in our country. It's the contract that every state has signed with the U.S. government saying we agree to be a state as long as we follow this Constitution. Now, the Constitution identifies those things that the federal government is allowed to do, and it's really quite a short list of things. I believe that the federal government gets away with doing many of the things they do only because the states do not stand up to them and say, stop it, you're breaking the contract. Our current politicians and representatives, you will find if you ask them questions about the federal government, if you ask the state legislators these things, often you'll hear an answer like, I don't get involved in federal issues, and that is so completely the reason we have such a problem. They must get involved in federal issues. They must say, federal government, enough is enough. And I'm not talking about just unconstitutional mandates, which is something that we hear a lot about, but it's unfunded mandates, it's unconstitutional mandates. That is the key.
But if you are elected to a state representative seat, you are involved generally in state legislation. You're going to be involved with education at the state level. What do you see as the issues in the state legislature for the next couple of years, which is what the term is?
Freedom being the thing that I keep in mind all the time. I want to allow everyone more freedom. That is to decide how they live their own life and how to spend their own money. You mentioned education at the state level. Well, the federal government is even getting involved in education, and it does not have the permission to do that based on the Constitution. Now, as far as Lansing goes, I don't think Lansing should be involved in education either. We can best educate our kids if we keep it close to home. It's the parents and the neighbors and the grandfolks that do the most good for educating a kid. How can anybody think that a bureaucrat in Lansing, who takes a cut of the money that we send them, knows best how to educate our kids? It's our own communities that can do a much better job.
What about, for instance, the state does testing of students, what's called the MEEP tests that they do in I'm not sure what grades, 4th or 8th or 11th.
They can certainly do that, but one thing you have to understand is if the government is designing these tests to take, they're going to design the test in such a way that kids are learning to think the government is the answer, the government. I think that private industry has always proven that they do a better job of anything that they do, and I think private industry could supply even better testing than a government in Lansing could supply.
Well, I know, but but you see the advantage of one entity doing it is that it's standardized then throughout the state of Michigan, as opposed to being testing that's done in each district by perhaps and possibly being scored in different ways.
And there could be a company that defines standardized testing throughout the state, and in fact, that company who would produce the best test is the one who's going to stay in business, and so they have a reason to produce the best test. Our government does not have any reason to produce the best test except in order for some politician to get reelected, and that is not what we want our government to do. We want them to make decisions which would be the best solution to our problems, but that's not what elected officials do.
Okay, well, if we move on to other issues other than education, for instance, roads and highways, is the state not the best organization to take care of roads and highways in and around Michigan?
Well, for some of them, it certainly is. I think we in Dearborn, just right now, we're dealing with problems where the roads that Wayne County is responsible are in worse shape than the roads that, say, Dearborn is responsible, and then the roads that the state is responsible could even be worse than the county roads. Of course, roads are critical, and that is one example of something that is such a good example of something that Lansing could be doing a good job at, and they can't even do that. And so if they can't even do a simple thing like keep the roads up, I certainly don't want them involved in other things that are not as obvious that they're not doing a good job at.
The road situation that you mentioned, now, if you want to take it to the local level, one of the problems in Wayne County has been monies for roads. And some people have said that those roads would be in better shape if the state were taking care of them, because usually it's been in the Detroit metropolitan area, it's been a case where the county roads are in worse shape than state
But
highways.
just like in Wayne County, we have to duke it out with Detroit and what Detroit wants. If we were responsible for our own roads, you can really believe that they would be in the best condition that they could be. If we're expecting Lansing to deal with our roads, well, we have to deal with Lansing and debate it with those folks in Traverse City and Grand Rapids and Cadillac and Muskegon, and so they don't care as much about Dearborn as we care about Dearborn. And so having our local government even take care of roads would be a better idea.
Okay, what particular record of public service and volunteer work do you have in Dearborn? Have you been involved in public service in this community?
No quote-unquote volunteer public service. I am a person who's always busy. I care about my family and my neighbors. When I moved in, I started fixing the house up. I won the City Beautification Award that first year, and I didn't even know that the award existed. I just automatically try to make my world a nice place, to enjoy the neighbors, I've gone to city council meetings, things like that. I work at Ford Motor Company. I'm the kind of guy who sees litter on the road and I stop and pick it up. I don't do things so that I get credit for it. I just plain old do them so that we all have a nicer world to live in.
This is your first attempt at running for an office?
That's right, except for in high school.
Okay, and why did you select this particular office as the one to run for? In a way, because of your interest in very localism, I would think you would actually want to run for something even more local than the state representative seat.
Why this over a city job? Well, because the state rep position is one which addresses all of them. It's the local, it's the state, and it's the federal. And that's why I want to move to work in a state-level job so that I can address all three levels of issues. We did talk about the U.S. government before, so it's not just the city that I'm concerned about, it's the whole state and the whole country. And from a state representative position, I can best address all three of those issues, especially to fill in where our current state representatives do not address federal issues, and they should.
Okay. One of the questions you wrote was, who is your favorite special interest group? That's an interesting question.
Again, that I thought would be interesting of the other candidates too, but my favorite special interest group would be those freedom-loving, hard-working, honest individuals out there, not necessarily part of a group. If I had a second favorite, it would be our veterans. I wish our veterans were treated more respectfully than they are, and so that's my favorite and second favorite.
Okay. One of the questions one of the other candidates posed was, would you support legislation to increase the homestead deduction and index it to the rate of inflation? As you well know, senior citizens do, within certain financial limits, are allowed to take a homestead deduction in order to meet taxation requirements. What's your feeling on the homestead deduction issue?
I am much more in favor of a flat tax. I don't think that any one group of people should get special treatment over another. If they do, then what is happening is we're doing special favors for one group of people. Now, seniors, absolutely. I respect and grateful for them. I'm so glad they're there. I wish I still had my grandfolks around. But we really can't treat them differently from everyone else. They need to be treated the same. If having more money in a senior's pocket is good for the senior, then why not having more money in all of our pockets be good for all of us? So let's just plain old lower taxes by getting government out of doing many of the things that they are currently doing that they should not be doing.
Okay. Tell me what you're finding as you go around town. First of all, how are you campaigning? And secondly, what are people telling you? What are they concerned about? What are they describing as the issues?
The biggest part of my campaign has been the three big stars that are on the bed of my pickup truck. I had worked on making a float for a former Memorial Day parade, and I ended up with these 3 big wooden stars, one red, one white, one blue. I mount those in the back of my pickup truck and drive all around. I've gone door to door. I've worked homecoming. There'll be a flyer going out to all voters. So I've done a little bit of all the things that regular candidates do. I estimate I've talked to about 2,000 people now. 5% of them don't want to talk to me. How dare I even run against our current incumbent? They say, no, I was her paper boy 20 years ago, and so of course I'm going to vote for her. Well, eek, that's not a reason to vote for someone, in my point of view. But what do people ask? A lot of people recognize that they are losing freedoms left and right. There are many people who have horror stories to tell me about what's gone on with them, and I listen to them, and I only hope that they're not true, but then I'm not here to solve all their problems, but I certainly want to listen, and I want to convince them how, if we can get government out of their face, they would have a much better chance of solving all their problems. People are concerned about the amount of taxation and the fact that every time you turn around there's another law that's being written, to the point where people don't know if they plant a new bush in their front yard, am I breaking a law? Do I have to get a permit? People are no longer feel free. And that's coming out loud and strong.
You're talking about freedoms, individual freedoms. In Dearborn, obviously, you were mentioning fixing up your home,
Yes.
and we did some projects around our home. There are codes even within the city.
Absolutely.
And you have to follow these codes. You have to have an addition, for instance, approved by an inspector.
Yes.
Is that an infringement of your freedom, in your opinion?
Well, there are...
We only have 2 minutes left, by the way.
Okay,
so.
local regulations are certainly understandable, and that's exactly where the regulation should be coming from. And that the reason for the regulation should be because the community decides that's the kind of regulation they want. But when Washington, D.C. or Lansing starts coming down with mandates that we have to build this EPA tunnel with all of its snafus, which is costing us millions, and we do it because the federal government says so, that's not the kind of regulation. Our community should decide for ourselves what kind of community we want.
That's a good example, though, of a situation that an individual community really could not decide on its own, because no matter what Dearborn would do to clean up the rouge, unless that agreement was reached by everyone who shares the rouge along
You're
the
absolutely
way,
right.
it wouldn't be effective.
A good example is that every year, I lived in Chicago for 3.5 years, and one of the things I learned
left.
in Chicago, every year Chicago sues Gary, Indiana for polluting the air, and every year Chicago wins, and Gary, Indiana pays Chicago. It's a good example. There are ways for communities to work together or to work against each other, and when one community, one person infringes on the next one, that's where your government needs to get involved. But it's only if there's a victim, the criminal, say, pays the victim for damages done.
Okay. Okay, November 3rd, you're going to be on the ballot for state representative for Dearborn.
Is it the 3rd or is it the 5th?
Is it the 5th? It is the 5th.
I think
That's
so.
right. I think it's November 5th. And we will see your name as Libertarian. Paul,
That's right.
This is Paul Kane. We will take a break here, and we will return in just a couple of minutes with another candidate, Gary Warrenchuk, for state representative. Stay with us.